Who has seen the movie Shadowlands with Anthony Hopkins and Deborah Winger? Not the most commonplace of the movies Anthony Hopkins has been in, but a fascinating one, especially in the eyes of some people. And not always the easiest to get a hold of. I remember spending $30 for a copy of the disc once, and yet ironically, 2 months ago found a copy in a Goodwill store for $1. But at any rate, it going into the ideas of C.S. Lewis, fascinating especially for Christians. I'd like to make a comment on one line toward the very end that Anthony Hopkins had said as he was teaching at Oxford University to young folks there in a small classroom setting. He said, "We read to know that we are not alone." I pondered that for years, and in respect to my delving later in life into the topic of validation and validation seeking and why we do it, and is it good or bad overall, and why, this phrase comes to mind: we read to know that we are not alone. I now rephrase that perhaps too to say, we read to get validation about certain things we can't get validation on anywhere else. I remember too my father, who has a degree in English literature, having said to me 40 years ago, "Books are my best friend." Well, I was suppose not literally in every sense. If you know what I mean, you don't take a book to bed and have certain pleasures from it, as opposed to people. And a book is not very interactive in general. But does a book tell us sometimes things we won't hear somewhere else for certain reasons, and hence your friend better than others in that respect? Or, you might say, it validates sometimes things we can't get validation on anywhere else, very frequently that is. You might even say then, porn or semi-porn, whatever you're going to call it, even coming in a brown wrapper in a mailbox as a certain magazine, I won't mention the topics, the titles, with lots of spreads, centerfolds, and so on. Isn't that then a form of getting something we can't get somewhere else sometimes, or maybe the purchasing of prostitutional comforts if we're not married, or in prison, your buddy, so to speak, sometimes. Sadly, in other venues, your child. Say in certain religious circles, even when their marriage has nothing going for it, or has lost variety in terms of the male's perspective, and he turns upon their children. Some religions more than others, actually, and even as highlighted then in certain problems with the priesthood and the turning upon children there, in some respects. But maybe the words thus, to recap, we read to know that we are not alone, could moreover mean not alone in terms of having high empathy for others when we're in a world sometimes, and especially industrialized nations, where empathy is in short supply and not in value in many people's lives. Materialism is, say, distraction, displacing aggressions, getting money for exigencies of life, instead of practicing in certain times and points acceptance in other things, including also compassion. If we feel all alone as to empathy being worthwhile and valuable in the long term, maybe books tell us sometimes that we are not alone in terms of the value long term of empathy. Maybe not short term always, but long term. Maybe too, books can tell us certain things that no one else has the courage to tell us, or you might say the freedom to tell us without getting in a lot of hot water, including even prison time or being shot, or having a reduced lifespan overall. Hence, books can be our best friend. Books can tell us we are not alone by supporting, by validating key truths that we can't get anywhere else oftentimes. Maybe the writer, for instance, has a lot of allies and then can publish with some degree of impunity, as opposed to one person saying something and being out on a limb, and very vulnerable and so saying nothing, verbally or in print or video. Or they may be quite wealthy and have security guards or live in a compound. Basically speaking, with security guards once again, they may be a president of the United States and be able to say things because they have a security detail. But even they can be shot. Even the Pope, one Pope was once shot, and Mr. Reagan. The Pope then, forever after, perhaps, traveling in a Pope-mobile, bulletproof. Maybe the Pope then could speak even more if they desire to on certain things, and so they are the equivalent of this book that tells us we are not alone and tells us, moreover, information we wish to hear sometimes that no one else can tell us because they're not in a Pope-mobile. Who rides around and lives life in bulletproof plastic or glass? They may even be in a foreign country and we read their books because they're imported or come on the internet. Or we can get them in a brown wrapper somehow, anonymously, neither party knowing who's consuming what. For instance, the rather racy book in certain manners, 50 Shades of Grey, I'm not so sure the authors live in the Bible Belt in a small town available to the comments and more of everybody. Yet, the book is consumed everywhere, even in the Bible Belt of America. But where are the authors? I don't think they are accessible to the negative comments and more of everybody in the country. They live somehow in a bubble more secure. And isn't that then what a book is in certain respects? Or even a video, what have you, delivered with a certain degree of anonymity and safety, hence termed our best friend, or something that will tell us we are not alone when our next door neighbor might not be able to do so. Our next door neighbor not living in a Pope-mobile, not having armed guards around them, a security detail, or the anonymity of living in a brown paper wrapper delivered anonymously, basically, or with a pen name attached to them as your next door neighbor. Hence again, why perhaps books can be one's best friend at times and tell you things you might not hear otherwise if the author, say, is using a pen name or is otherwise inaccessible to not just sticks and stones, or rather words, but sticks and stones, literally being shot or something to that effect. Kind of like reminding me of a gentleman, trying to remember, who wrote something rather incendiary toward the Muslim faith and perhaps Muhammad, and then went into hiding for many years wearing wigs after having left the country and living in motels and hotels in England. The name escapes my mind, but I think this rings a bell. Of course, the final issue being how few people can speak up about anything that goes against the grain of some, either hurting their pride or their big income sources, developed sometimes questionably, unless they have the ultimate in respect, and this shows in their words. How many of us are linguistic experts, thus, to be able to pull that off? Gandhi? A few others? Maybe at times Lincoln? Even both of them, by the way, were shot and died of bullets. So we tend to watch our words, often saying nothing. Books, then, being a vehicle for delivering key things we love to hear or indulge in, plus or minus in the long run, because the alternative sources can take a bullet all the easier. Noting Lincoln and Gandhi did not just write, they were out there in the public sphere. Lincoln shot at a theater performance, and Gandhi shot in a crowd, always welcoming everyone, in the latter case, who wished to visit him. For life to have been otherwise, they deemed, I'm sure, would have been too much of a compromise to their way of life and what they most wanted to accomplish in life. Food for thought here, anyway.